Welcome to episode 25 of The Chess Angle. That's supposed to be a big deal in podcasting. They say 25 episodes in. Not sure exactly what it means. That and $1 won't buy me a cup of coffee, but we're 25 episodes in. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate all of the positive feedback. And in this episode, I'm going to be discussing my experiences as the founder and tournament director, or TD, of a chess club. And this episode will be in 3 parts. First, I'm going to discuss why I felt compelled to start my own chess club, because it was a little bit of a matter of circumstances. I'll explain that in a few minutes. Then I'm going to talk about what it's like playing and directing in the same tournament, because I get asked about that a lot. And then lastly, and this will be the fun part of this, I'm going to talk about some wild and interesting incidents at the club that I observed over the years as a TD. So that should be kind of fun. One day I'll write a book about that. But anyway, let's start with the reason I started my own club. At the time, and I'm going back to maybe 2000, 1999, around there, about 20 years ago or so. So I'm going back quite a while. There was really only one major chess club on Long Island in New York where I am. Okay, and I was just getting into tournaments. There was another smaller club, but it wasn't really well attended. It was sort of phasing out. So there was this one major club. And the first thing I'm going to start with is the time control of this club. At the time, time delay was not really mainstream. It was more of a fringe thing, and a lot of clubs weren't using it. Now it's much more standard and it's expected. So remember, I'm speaking about this club at the time, all right, about 20 years ago or so. So the time control, which I thought was very odd, was 40 and 80, and then 40 and 60, and then 15 and 15 recurring. So what that means is the first time control was 40 moves in 80 minutes, then 40 moves in 60 minutes, and then a recurring control of 15 moves in 15 minutes, I believe. Now, that third time control really wasn't a factor because after the first 80 moves, most games were finished. But the point is, there was no time delay. And with 40 and 80 for that first time control, that averages to 2 minutes a move. But the problem is, as soon as you have those 1 or 2 positions where you really have to think, and that's going to happen, you're now playing speed chess for the entire rest of that control. And it made no sense. It was very frustrating. And the other thing, because it was such a long time control, you could conceivably be there well past 11 o'clock or even 11:30 or later. And that's awfully tough if you're a working person and, you have to get up the next day. That's just really late for during the week, in my opinion. And just as a side note, all time controls should be sudden death, meaning it's just one time control for the whole game. For example, game in 90, game in 2 hours. You don't have to worry about individual move numbers. You have an allotted amount of time for the entire game. That should be universal. Just saying. It just makes so much more sense. It's cleaner. I guess the reason they have the multiple time controls, like 40 in 2 hours, things like that, is so that most of the games will finish maybe earlier, something like that. I'm sure there's a logical reason for it, but it's just so much easier when you don't have to deal with move numbers. Just keep it as a sudden death control. Here's the time for the entire game. Makes so much more sense. My club is game 90 with a 5-second delay, and it works out really well. Now you may say, wait a minute, yours is game 90, but you're criticizing this other control where the first time control was 40 and 80. Yes, but the extra 10 minutes with the time delay does make a difference, as opposed to 40 and 80 and 40 and 60 with no delay. And the thing with game 90 delay 5, the reason I like that is because it's not too much or too little. In other words, with a game 90, okay, it's slow enough that you can play a thoughtful, strategic game, but it's fast enough that you're not there all night. Most of the games end around 9:30, 9:45. But even if it goes to the bitter end, let's say it goes till 10:30, 10:35, that's not too bad during the week. And that's why I like it. It's a good mix. If it were game in 2 hours, that would be too much. And if it were game in 60, that would be too quick. So I find that game 90 with a 5-second delay, meaning each player has 90 minutes for the entire game and a 5-second delay before each move. So conceivably the game could be about 3 hours, maybe a little more with the delay. I think that's perfect for a club that meets at night during the week. All right. But this other control, this 40 and 80, 40 and 60, it just made no sense to me at the time. It was very difficult. Like I said, as soon as you really had to think for one position, you're basically playing speed chess for the rest of that control. And of course, there was no delay, which I didn't like. And the games could go really late. So that was an issue for me, the time control. Just in general, I mean, I could give some other things, but I won't go any further than that. I just wasn't feeling it at this club. This is just my opinion. All right. Other people may feel differently. I'm sure they do. I'm just giving you my opinion. I basically said, I can continue going to this club, not being happy, not agreeing with some of the choices being made, just my opinion, or I can start my own club. Now, I didn't think of starting my own club right away. That didn't even pop into my head as a consideration. When I started playing in tournaments, I never even considered would I want to start my own club. But I basically said, I love the game. I like playing in tournaments. I want it to be a good experience. And for whatever reason, because I know others didn't agree with me, but for me personally, this other club, it just wasn't happening for me. And so I kicked around the idea. This was in 2007. That's when the Long Island Chess Club started. So this is a number of years later, okay? Because I started playing at that club, just to give you some context, because I realized I didn't do that maybe as thoroughly as I should have. I started playing at that club, I'm going to say maybe around 2000-ish, something like that. It might have been earlier, I'm not sure. But the point is, I didn't consider starting my own club until maybe 5 or 6 years later, because this wasn't the only other club I played at. It was just the one that was closest to me. So it's not like I started my own club immediately. This was after a number of years. And also, I wasn't playing at this club all the time. I had taken a few breaks because of, getting my master's degree and things like that. So it was kind of an on and off thing. But when I was playing there, as I said, I kind of had to make a choice. Do I want to keep playing here where I'm not happy? Or do I want to make a decision about starting my own club? And that's what I did. So 2007, I started the Long Island Chess Club. What happened was I had put out some flyers and some emails just to kind of gauge interest. Because my thinking was, are people going to want to do this? Are they going to be interested in it? If I didn't get much feedback, I probably wouldn't have bothered. So we started out on Saturday mornings. I put some interest out there, put some feelers out there. People said, sure, I'll do it. So we started on a Saturday morning, and our first tournament, we had like 12 people, which I was actually happy with, because I said to myself, for the first tournament, I'll be lucky if I get like 6 people. So we started out with about 12, and it went okay. Then we ended up moving to Thursday nights. I'm kind of giving you the condensed version. Saturdays didn't work out for a number of reasons. So we ended up moving to Thursday nights, and it's been building ever since. And now we have some great numbers. Of course, the pandemic and the Queen's Gambit, as I've mentioned, that really helped a lot. But the club's doing well now. And the Game 90 Delay 5 is doing really well. I'm kicking around the idea of making the delay 10 seconds. There's been some interest in that. Tim Mirabile suggested that when I interviewed him, and it's kind of been in my head now, swirling around. So that's something I'm considering. But what I like about the Game 90 Delay 5 time control, again, it's the perfect balance. It's slow enough that you can play a thoughtful game, a strategic game, but it's fast enough that you're not there all night and you get out at a reasonable hour for those who have to work the next day, which is most of the participants. And, we do get some kids as well, some high school kids, middle school kids, even younger. So it works out very well. And that is why I started the Long Island Chess Club. I just wasn't happy with, the other offerings in the area. So now let's talk about what it's like playing and directing in the same tournament, because I get asked about that or have comments made to me about that all the time. So as far as playing and directing in the same event, let's talk about the U.S. Chess Federation's rules and stance on that. So what the rule book says and what their position is that for major events where there are substantial prizes, such as the Continental Chess Association events, such as the World Open, the U.S. Open, all those, you cannot direct and play in the same event. And that makes sense because the prizes are in the thousands of dollars. However, at the club level, where the prizes are significantly less, it's very common for the organizer or the TD to also play. And in fact, that is generally the case, and they acknowledge that most chess clubs would not exist if the tournament director couldn't also play. And it even says that in Chess Life magazine, or as my friend calls it, No Life magazine. I think that's funny. But moving on. So the rule book acknowledges that most chess clubs, again, wouldn't exist if the TD couldn't play. Now they say, yes, ideally you shouldn't direct and play. But again, they know that these smaller clubs, which are really the backbone of the U.S. Chess Federation as far as, tournament play, they wouldn't exist if the organizer couldn't play. I mean, let's face it, I wouldn't do all this work running a chess club if I couldn't play as well. But the one thing is, I get asked all the time, like, how do you do it? I don't know how you play and direct. I couldn't do it. I don't get it. I'm surprised your rating is as decent as it is. I get this pretty much on a regular basis. And in fact, one of our regulars who's almost a master, he's like 2100 plus, he was talking to me about this for like 10 minutes. He goes, I don't know how you do it. He goes, I get distracted so easily. There's no way I could do it. And so how do I do it? The short answer is you just do it. You don't think about it and you don't make excuses. I wish there was some formula I could tell you or some routine, but you just do it. I like the game. I like playing. I like running the club, and you just don't think about it and you just jump in and do it. It's kind of like the old, the myth of Sisyphus. He was like a mythical character who was punished to move a rock up and down a hill. Like that was his whole life. He had to move this rock up the hill, then it would roll down, then he would have to do it again. And that was his whole life. And the thing is, he found happiness because he knew it wasn't going to change. No matter how much he complained or tried to do something, it wasn't going to change. So he found happiness because he knew that that's how it was going to be. And he goes, I can either complain and be miserable, or I can accept this is how it's going to be. And that's how he found happiness. I guess that's kind of an existential viewpoint. Now, I know that's a little dramatic for my situation, but the point is, I just accept it, right? Directing and playing, yeah, it can sometimes be like pushing the rock up a hill because I know it's not going to change, right? I have to get to the club early and I have to stay until the last game. If I have an early win, I can't just go home and, do things at the house or whatever I need to do other things. I still need to stay there the whole time. If I had a stinker of a game and I lost early, I can't just, cover my head and walk out and leave. I have to stay there the whole time, but that's okay. That's the choice I made. And, it does get tricky. I'll sometimes bring, work with me if I finish early, so I have something to do, but I don't have those options, right? When my game is over, I can't just leave. But that's how it works, and I'm okay with that. And what I basically try to do is I just try to compose myself and just play. Round one is the toughest because you're doing the pairings. It's a lot more work. You're doing the initial pairings, I should say, collecting entry fees. Round one is always tricky. And then people are texting you like last minute, can you pair me? I'm running late. And so, my head is kind of spinning. And then for me to just flip a switch and boom, play a game, that can be tough. So what I try to do is just try to take a couple of deep breaths, compose myself. And I just, I do the best I can. What's tricky is when players approach me during my game. But again, I have to deal with that. So I could have a tricky position. Let's say it's out of the opening too. Let's say my opponent springs something on me and I really have to think. When someone says, oh, I have a question about the clock or this or that, whatever it is, it totally ruins my train of thought, but I have to deal with that. Now, what I'm allowed to do, this is per USCF rules, I can pause my clock, deal with my TD responsibilities, and then come back. I'm allowed to do that. So I don't have to lose time on my clock. But the rules also say while my clock is paused, my opponent can look at the position. So that puts me at a little bit of a disadvantage because without any time on his clock, he gets to study the position, free of charge, so to speak, while I deal with this, TD situation, whatever it might be, whatever they need me to do. So that can give my opponent an advantage. That's kind of a big deal. But again, that's the choice I made. I opened this door, so I'm walking through it. And it can be tricky at times. Other nights are busier than others. Sometimes it's not so bad. But like I said, round one is always tricky. And if there are a lot of questions during my game, that can get frustrating. Where I really feel it is if I'm in the middle of a tough game and then I have to make a ruling because two players are either arguing about something or there's a dispute about like a threefold repetition or there's like a touch move dispute. I mean, that happened once. I was in a tough game and they were arguing over touch move, which is always tricky to deal with. I mean, the short answer is if one guy says, well, you touched the piece and the other guy says, no, I didn't, unless you have a witness, you really can't honor it. And it becomes tricky. You kind of have to deal with each situation on its own. But if it's something that involves an argument between two players, like I said, it could be a touch move ruling. It could be a threefold repetition thing. It could be, well, he's distracting me. He keeps doing this. He keeps doing that. Those types of things where my involvement might be a little bit longer, that can get frustrating. But again, I have to deal with that. And of course, this whole time, my opponent gets to study the position, which will ultimately save him time on his clock. But that's how it goes. So the short answer is, how do I do it? I just do it. I don't think about it. I deal with it. And I know going in that it might be tricky on some nights, but generally speaking, it's not too bad. Most of the games are self-sufficient. The players know what they're doing. Because we have time delay, I don't have to worry about, dealing with, like rulings at the end. Like, there used to be this thing, Rule 14H, it was insufficient losing chances. I won't even get into that. It was a type of draw, but time delay kind of avoided all that. So I deal with it the best I can. I try not to let it bother me. But again, some nights it's trickier than others. And I just move forward. I don't think about it. It's like the old myth of Sisyphus. I'm going to have to keep pushing that rock up the hill and have it come down. And I'm always going to have to deal with something, but I make it work. So I try not to complain about it or use it as an excuse if I play poorly. All right. So that's the answer for that. And now this will be the fun segment of this. I'm going to discuss some crazy, funny, interesting, etc. incidents and situations that happened at the club that I observed as a TD. So here we go. So I'm going to start with this one. One night at the club, a player checkmated his opponent and correctly marked the score on the pairing sheet as a win, of course. So the opponent goes home. I think that's the end of it. But it turns out that the winner approached me about an hour later looking somewhat unsettled. And he said, I just realized my opponent's last move before being checkmated was illegal. Now, many of you may think this is somehow a thorny situation, but it's really not. My ruling was that the win stands. Mate trumps all, and no one mentioned an illegal move at the time. Both players agreed it was a win by checkmate, and the score was marked. So end of story. Mate trumps everything. So that was actually an easy one. All right, next thing. Many people offer suggestions without wanting to be a part of the solution or do any of the work. It's human nature. Now, as with most local chess clubs, the players are required to provide their own chess equipment, boards, pieces, chess clock, etc. It's generally just not cost effective or practical for the organizer to do this with all the other work and expenses that go into running a club. So one player said to me, "You should get boards and set them up for the club. That would be nice." So I replied, "Sure, if that's something that interests you, go out and buy them, and you have my permission to arrive early each week to set them up and to stay late and clean them up and put them away." And he said nothing further and just walked away. So that's how I handled that. Next one is kind of an interesting psychology type thing. So a 1,300 rated player came up to me after his game and he said, "I had a nice win against a 1,500 player. It turns out his opponent was rated in the 1,800s, which means the win was a major upset as he beat someone over 600 points higher than himself. He misread the wall chart and wrote down the wrong rating on his score sheet. Would he have been more nervous and hesitant in his play if he knew his opponent was much higher rated?" Interesting, would the result have been different? I talked a little bit about that in the last episode, but that was kind of a funny thing. So now let's talk about withdrawing from tournaments. A player, of course, is entitled to withdraw from a chess tournament at any point in the event, as long as he notifies the TD. There could be many reasons for this: illness, work conflicts, a change in schedule, a family situation. After a withdrawal, even after just one round, the player does not get the entry fee refunded. Per US chess rules, some of you who may be new to tournaments may not know that. If you withdraw, even if you just play one game, you don't get the entry fee back. That's how it works. And many players, however, withdraw for the simple reason that they're not playing well. They're either no longer in contention for a prize, or they don't want to be paired down against the lower rated opponent if they lost. And they feel the best solution is to cut their losses and wait for the next event. In fact, some players are so hypersensitive about losing that they'll drop out after just one round, especially if they lost to a much lower rated player. I know at least two guys here on the island who are like that. Like, they'll lose round one and they'll hide for like months at a time, literally. But that's fine. They have a right to do it. But I've noticed as a TD that many players who withdraw after a bad start won't admit that that's the reason for leaving the event, even though I know that's exactly why they're leaving. And it's not a big deal. They shouldn't be embarrassed about it. Maybe they think I will pass judgment, which I wouldn't do. If someone says I'm withdrawing or dropping out, it doesn't matter if it's after one round. I just reply, "Okay, thanks for letting me know," which is how a TD should respond. But anyway, here's one email I received from a player who dropped out after losing the first 3 rounds. "When I arrived home after today's round, I found that I had a major problem with a door on my car. This problem is going to keep me occupied for a while, so I have decided not to play in the last 2 rounds." Okay. But I get these types of phrases like all the time, even though I know why they're withdrawing. Not a big deal, but so that's one thing. So now let's move on. This one's about scorekeeping. So a beginner at my club was unaware how to keep score. So per the rules, I allowed him to play and I deducted 5% of his time. So of course, one of these stodgy regulars overheard this and asked if he could choose not to keep score in exchange for the time reduction. Now, I had to deny his request, which was correct, because the spirit of the rule is for beginners or those who are physically unable to keep score. A player who knows how to keep score can't opt out just because he doesn't feel like doing it. It doesn't work that way. You have to keep score. So that was funny. Someone tried to take advantage there. Now, this next one might be the funniest of the lot. So a player at the club, and I am not making this up, he felt that he should be exempt from the entry fee because he loses too many games. I can't say that with a straight face. He came up to me, he goes, "I keep losing every week. I shouldn't have to pay the entry fee." So I looked at him and I'm like, "Listen, I get it, but," and I mean, even he knew he was being, not inappropriate, but even he was being unreasonable. I think it was just heat of the moment because he had just lost his game. But, I'm just like, "Sorry, buddy, it doesn't work that way." But yeah, he literally asked me to be exempt from paying the entry fee because he's losing so much. I mean, after a good laugh, I did kind of sympathize because I get it. I mean, I remember when I first started playing in tournaments, I had a lot of losses, but I was never asked before if someone could be exempt from the entry fee for that reason. So that was a first. So that makes me laugh. So here's another one. An 1800 player on the move looked at his opponent, who is a relative beginner, and said, "It's mate in 2 without moving." And this beginner looked up very confused. A bunch of us was standing around because it was one of the later games. So I said to the higher rated player, I said, don't announce your plans, just make a move, which he did. And then he replied, "Oh, okay, I guess it's not the 18th century." Like, you're really not supposed to make those kind of comments like, "I declare mate in 3, I declare mate in 2. That's kind of, elitist. You're not supposed to do that. Just make your move on the board and move on. So one night at the club, a player had his headphones on and he was observing a game because his game was finished. And it was an unrated player against an 1800 player. And then he quote unquote whispered to a friend, "I think the new unrated guy is going to draw." But he didn't realize how loud it was because he had his headphones on. So a bunch of us heard it. We were kind of chuckling, but it was kind of funny. But that happened. And then here's another one involving stalemate. So a player on the move, when he has no legal moves that can be made, that's of course a stalemate and the game is drawn. So if it's your turn to move and you have no legal moves on the board, it's a stalemate. And stalemate adds a certain beauty to the game, and it gives the losing player a resource to squeeze out a draw if the winning player gets careless. But apparently not everyone is aware of this. So upon arriving at a stalemated position, a player at the club said to me, "Yeah, this is stalemate, but isn't it a win for me because I'm up a pawn?" And I had to convince him that the material doesn't matter. So he thought because he had extra material that the stalemate is a win. And I mean, this is going on for like 5-6 minutes. I had to convince him, but he's like, "But I'm up a pawn. I'm up a pawn." I'm like, it doesn't matter how many pieces are or aren't on the board. I go, if it's a stalemate, if one player, if it's his turn to move and he has no legal moves, it's a draw. It doesn't matter how many pieces are on the board or not. So that was kind of funny. It was a little annoying, but it was also kind of funny at the same time. So speaking of draws, all right, let's talk about improper draw offers, which are rampant in tournament chess. So the correct method for offering a draw, and I discussed this in detail in a previous episode, you have to wait until it's your turn to move, right? Your clock is running. You make your move first, you offer the draw, and then you hit your clock. Now, if you offer the draw before moving, your opponent can and should request that you move first, after which the offer still stands unless you checkmate him. Now, if you find a winning move, you can't rescind the draw offer, all right? So that being said, a draw offer still stands even if it doesn't follow the rule above. So even if you make a draw offer improperly, even if it's not your turn to move, if you say I offer a draw, it still stands. So that should really be called not the rule for offering the draw, but the preferred way. Okay, because even if you offer a draw improperly, it still counts. So there was a new player at the club, a very good player, who would not only offer the draw, but he would verbally explain how he was going to proceed if the draw offer was declined. Now, I told him he can't do this, but he kept doing it. So, for example, he would say, "I offer a draw because I'm going to keep moving my bishop back and forth, and you have no entry points into my position." I mean, it's actually kind of funny. But I, explained to him, like, you can't talk about the game, just offer the draw. But he kept doing this. I don't know, it was kind of a funny thing. Now, regarding chess clocks, if a player's clock runs out of time, it's sometimes referred to as a flag fall, which refers to the old analog clocks that have a little flag-shaped plastic piece that falls when time runs out. Of course, digital clocks with time delay are now standard. You lose the game, right? So if your flag falls or your time runs out, you lose the game, but your opponent has to point that out. He has to call it. So it's not really when your clock runs out or your time runs out, it's when it's called. All right. So if you run out of time, but your opponent doesn't say, you're down, your time ran out, you can still play. And games have been won by a player who was out of time because he was able to checkmate his opponent who didn't notice the clock. And this actually happened one night at the club. It was the last game of the night. So a bunch of us were standing around. A player's flag was down for literally like 4.5 minutes, which is like an eternity. We were practically like chewing our nails off watching this, but he won because he checkmated his opponent because he never called that his flag was down. All his opponent had to say was, "You're down, your time's out," and he would have won the game, but he didn't see it. And that's what it goes by him because the guy whose time ran out because he checkmated his opponent, the game was over. So crazy, crazy stuff, but it happens. So I'll end with this. I mean, I could go on, but I don't want this to get too carried away. So we have a couple of guys at the club who are piece and clock slammers. Now, I don't know what it's about. I don't know if it's a way to sort of try to intimidate your opponent or if it's like, ha, I got you. So one night, one of the players who does this a lot starts slamming his pieces and then the clock. So then the opponent starts matching him and does it as well. So it's like slam the piece, slam the clock, and we're listening to this. It sounded like, someone's playing whack-a-mole at a carnival. So finally I had to go over and I'm like, guys, what are you trying to like break the clock or something? I go, stop slamming the pieces in the clock, and they did, but of course, I didn't realize, they claim, I don't know, maybe it was just adrenaline, but it was kind of funny. You're really not supposed to slam the pieces or slam the clock, but that was something I had to deal with. So these are just some funny things that have happened to the club. I really haven't had anything too crazy, but just little incidents that happen, things you have to deal with. So this episode was kind of a personal story for me, how I started the club and what it's like playing and directing and just some things I deal with. So hope you enjoyed it. Really appreciate you listening. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.